Good morning. I'm Kirsten Russell, Vice President of Community Impact, and on behalf of the Community Foundation of Sarasota County's Board of Directors and CEO and President, Roxy Jarity, I'm welcoming you this morning. Thank you for joining us for our conversation on arts and healing. While I am sure you are all Zoom experts at this point, we just want to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded. All of our guests will be on mute and will not be seen on the video. Only our panelists. And questions can be submitted via the Q&A or chat buttons on your screen. We want this to be an interactive dialogue, so please share with us your questions and comments, and my colleague Angelica Hull will be addressing the queue as we go. We are here for a discussion about arts and healing. And I know it comes as no surprise to all of you that our arts community has been one of the hardest hit sectors during the pandemic. But they've also proven to be incredibly innovative, nimble, and resilient. As we look ahead, our arts community will play a critical role in healing and continuing to build a community of belonging and culture. We are so pleased to have these incredible individuals with us to share their perspective this morning. We have Dr. Catherine Wilkins joining us as the moderator. Catherine joins us from USF, where she teaches in the Honors College. While she teaches tons of classes, one of her signature classes is Connections, where students learn to facilitate interactions with art for people with Alzheimer's, depression, PTSD, and other mental health conditions. When she has free time, you might find her on the beach or surfing. On our panel today, we have Laura Stiefel Moore, who is the head of education programs at Ringling Museum. We know Laura is happy to be in Sarasota since there's likely snow on the ground in her Minnesota stomping grounds. Thank you for being with us, Laura. Julie Leach left the world of accounting and has spent the last 5 years as the executive director at Westcoast Black Theater Troupe, where she is committed to the arts and social justice. A new priority for Julie during the pandemic is spending time with her 8-month-old grandson. Joining us from the Sarasota Ballet is Christopher Hurd, the education director. As soon as he speaks, you will recognize that he hails from England. A little known fact about Christopher, he can say the alphabet backwards. And last, but certainly not least, Kelli Maldonado joins us from the Van Wezel Performing Arts Center, where she is the Director of Education and Engagement. I've had the privilege of working with Kelli since I started at the foundation many years ago. At that time, she was not a mom, and now she is a proud mother of Billy, who is 5 years old and started kindergarten in this pandemic. So Kelli is able to work in all the great work she does with children and parents as a mother, a parent of a child. Without further ado, I will turn our conversation over to Catherine. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us today, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for the kind introduction, and to everyone who is attending today. I'm excited to be having this conversation. I think the pandemic has really foregrounded the importance of the arts for community healing, but that I hope, it comes out in our conversation today that the arts have always played an important role in the health of individuals and the community. But definitely we're going to be focusing on the context of the pandemic year. So I thought we might start this conversation by asking what one word each of you would use to describe this past year for yourself or for your organization. And you could just raise your hand or unmute when you're ready to share. What's your one word that describes this past year for you? Julie?
I would say it's unpredictable.
Unpredictable indeed. Kelli, what about you? What's your one word for this year?
I'm like, oh, I've chosen a hyphenated word, but we'll say it counts. Ever changing.
Okay, so we're getting a sense it's really in flux, a little bit chaotic. Christopher, how about for you?
Good morning, everyone. I think actually my word, and it might sound surprising, is inspiring.
Tell us a
Based on
little
what's
bit
going
more.
on, it has been inspiring, and I'll share more later.
Okay. Laura?
So my word is essential. Thinking about sort of the dichotomy between non-essential and essential, which is something that's been on the floor a lot, and then how we as a museum can make ourselves essential and really activate our collection for the good of the community. So we've been thinking a lot about that.
Okay, I love the picture that the four of your words together combined help create for us, that it has been a year of lots of ups and downs, chaotic, unpredictable, ever-changing, but that the very essence of change in and of itself can be inspiring and can lead us to recognize maybe the essential role that our institutions have played that either we or others in the community may have taken for granted. So I'm looking forward to digging more deeply into these concepts with y'all during the conversation today. First, I'd like to turn back the clock to pre-pandemic times. Let's imagine it's February 2020. Tell me a little bit about your conception at that point in time of the arts and health, and what kind of programming your institution might have been doing related to this topic. Laura, would you mind sharing? Or Kelli, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So at the Van Wezel, we've really been looking at the picture of the whole student and all the stakeholders in that student, and really that as we focus our work on education, finding that piece of engagement and connecting it to families has been ever important through our two gen approach, where we have family nights with the Van Wezel. So we had this view that it's not just one person, one challenge that we're looking at. And we had started making sure our staff is aware of social emotional learning and trauma-informed care. But that trauma-informed care was seen to be about identifying the students throughout the daily work that we're doing, as opposed to something like we have today, where we're all kind of in a shared trauma going through this pandemic, and everyone has to experience that. So that's really been that's a bit of where we were, is just looking at looking at that two-gen approach and individual student work.
For those of us who aren't super familiar with the two-gen approach and your programming for students in general, can you tell us a little bit more about the target audience and what they are doing to the Van Wezel?
So many people know the Van Wezel as, the performing arts center for the community, and some may not even be incredibly familiar with our education program. But we, through our school time performance series, serve about 30,000 year pre-pandemic, and I'll share a little bit about what that looks like during the pandemic. And that's kind of the intro to it, and maybe if you know a bit about us, what we do. But what we really look at is how we can engage the teachers, the families, and the students themselves. So we train the teachers in arts integrated approaches, how they can learn to look at character traits or problem and solution in a book through Tableau or through visual art. And then we bring those skills directly to the parents with the family literacy night. That two-gen approach is really just a way to say that we see parents as stakeholders in the children's learning, and really want to give empower them to feel like they can play a very active role in their children's learning. So they learn skills to use the arts at home. We provide them with a meal. This is the pre-pandemic version where it happens in person. Provide them with a meal, those sort of essential skills that they can practice on a daily basis to get their children excited to read and to feel comfortable using those language arts-based vocabulary and support the learning that is happening in school. And then we send them home with a book so that they actually have the skills to practice that at home.
Thank you. I love the idea of serving the whole individual, right? Not only their educational needs, but their physical needs too, and providing meals for students who might be in need. And then trying to expand that to the family as well to bring greater health to the broader community. Thanks, Kelli. Laura, what were you doing pre-pandemic at the intersection of arts and health?
Yeah, we actually had a pretty direct connection. We have a partnership with Sarasota Memorial Hospital focused on training healthcare providers with the ultimate goal, of course, of better patient outcomes. So we were looking to hone some of those skills that are essential. In particular, we work with our nurse residency program. So these are mostly new grad nurses who are working in the clinical or hospital setting for the first time. And so we can use art interventions with these people to hone their observation skills, right? We're looking at all kinds of overwhelming visual evidence and making sense of it. And then going hand in hand with that is communication skills. You have to be able to articulate what it is that you're seeing. And from that naturally flows team building because you're working together to make meaning from an unknown image. And as well as some other kind of key skills like tolerance of ambiguity. In nursing school or medical school, there's sort of a black and white, there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And then you get thrown into the real world where there's this multitude of possibilities, and that can be very disconcerting. And then also we really try to focus on empathy building as well. Recognizing kind of the patient as a whole person, understanding that they come from different perspectives and backgrounds, and really exposure to art can be really beneficial in that. So we had this program in place for a couple of years before the pandemic hit, and we've had to make some adjustments, of course, and we've tweaked also some of our desired outcomes. And I am happy to talk more about that later. But we have the nurse program, and then we also are working with a group of sort of interprofessional healthcare providers, doctors, educators, nurses, using visual thinking strategies, which is a very specific framework for engaging with art that helps them, again, become better communicators, better critical thinkers, and all of that. So we've really been thinking about how we can leverage what we have at the museum in the service of skill building for providers.
Thanks so much. I'm familiar with the Ringling Reflections program and had thought previously about the ways in which your institution was serving patients and their caregivers in the community. And it's exciting to hear about your pivot towards also providing arts interactions for healthcare providers too. Julie, I think I saw you on mute before.
Yeah. So prior to the pandemic, I would say we were mostly focused in healing the community through building bridges between a very divided community in a lot of ways racially, and really teaching empathy in a lot of ways. I think the arts are ideal for, and storytelling in particular is ideal for teaching empathy and helping people build those empathetic skills, helping people understand history in a new way sometimes, things like that. So I think that's a lot of what we were doing. Our patrons get very attached to us. It's wonderful. We have a wonderful community of patrons here that love our work and are excited about our work. And partly that's because we have a tradition of engaging with them after the shows. Pre-pandemic, we always line up after the show and say goodbye and thank you to all the patrons that came to the theater. And we're also a artist development theater more than just entertainment. So a lot of our patrons have seen our actors and actresses from their first show at the theater, and now it's their 15th show and their skills have built, and they like to talk with them about that. So of course, when the pandemic happened, we had to shut that down, which is really not. So that's been hard for us. We're very engaging and loving folks around here. So we like that physical contact with our patrons, but of course we can't do that, but I'll talk about post-pandemic since later.
Yeah, I mean, this might actually be a nice point to pivot and bring Christopher into the conversation as well. It sounds like, we've talked with Kelli about providing health to the full person of the children and their parents who are involved in the Van Wezel's programming. Laura was describing kind of extending that out to healthcare providers in the community. And Julie, I hear you talking about the role that the arts can play in providing kind of broader healing across racial and cultural divides in our community, and just how important that in-person interaction has been to that mission that you've had. So I wonder, and we can start with Christopher and then extend the conversation to everyone. How did your programming change as a result of the pandemic? How did your relationship with the community change?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, obviously dance is a physical art form, which in itself is so supportive towards health. And one of the things that in our approach to our training of students, whether it be a 3-year-old to a 93-year-old, let's face it, is really a holistic approach to it. And the biggest thing once the pandemic hit, from my perspective and the ballet's perspective, is we wanted to keep everyone dancing in whatever way we could make that happen. So of course, enter the world of Zoom, and which we either love or hate, probably have both relationships with it. But the good thing about it was it meant that we were able to continue to offer training to every part of our education programming, from the school to our conservatory, which are professional students. And I think one of the most important demographics that we have is our Dance to the Next Generation program, which is for students who is specifically a dropout prevention program. And they are the biggest population that potentially we could have lost because they maybe would not have the access to the devices or anything to stay connected with us. Oh, sorry. So one of the things we did was we actually, through a grant and through great support, were able to provide every student with a tablet so that they could access our programming from home. And so we were able to teach them dance via Zoom. We also have been doing a weekly or bi-weekly enrichment opportunity for them. So for example, in other years where they've been able to tour a university, we were able to connect and have them tour virtually via Zoom. We've had the orchestra come and do a session with them virtually as well. So I'm just so proud that we've been able to keep that population engaged with us because they're the ones that arts touch them in such a special way. And the thing about ballet in its essence is that it not only teaches them, of course, about the beautiful art form, but it gives them so many other skills, self-discipline, time management, all those things. And so I'm so pleased that we could keep that going during the pandemic, and we continue to do that.
That's really wonderful to hear, Christopher. Thinking first about what you said regarding dance and its how healthy this practice is. I know I certainly haven't been moving as much as I used to pre-pandemic. So I appreciate that you're providing everyone opportunities to move more through your virtual programming, and that especially you've been able to keep Dance the Next Generation going through the support of your generous patrons at this time. That's fantastic. How have others adapted their programming during the pandemic?
Well, I could say, you want to go, Laura?
Go ahead, Julie, go ahead.
So one thing that we've been able to do too is all our education programming, which is really interesting. I'm interested in hearing Christopher say that too, that that's the one thing we could really hang on to and adapt the fastest. So last summer, we still did our 5-week stage of discovery program for our students. We had to go to Zoom, although at the end of it, then we did some things outdoors, and we filmed an outdoor music video with the kids instead of doing a performance for an audience like we normally do. But that worked out really well. And then our in-school program, normally we tour the local high schools, all the Sarasota County high schools and some Manatee County high schools, with a Jazz Links program that's with the Jazz Club of Sarasota, and teach them about history through music. We were able to adapt that to a Zoom format too. And then we've done some other programs with our adult audience and all through Zoom too. So there's, it's provided those connections, like you say, love or hate it, but it's certainly allowed us to adapt those things.
Laura?
Oh yeah, and I was going to add, the benefits of Zoom for us have been additionally that, when you're giving a tour in the gallery in person, you're bound by the physical limits of what's displayed in the gallery. You need to choose an accessible route, where virtually we have now this opportunity to juxtapose really interesting examples of art from different periods. We can show works of art that are currently off view in storage. And also it gives us the opportunity to pull from our contemporary collection, a lot of which is photographs or works on paper, and which is a better representation of BIPOC artists or other underrepresented artists. So thinking through an equity lens, what we can do with virtual programming, not only in the content we're presenting, but then also the audiences we're reaching. We record our programs, they become accessible online for free. So I have to say, I'm one of the love Zoom people. It's been a really great tool for us. But I wanted to also just mention another technology that we've been able to use or get as a result of this pandemic, which is we have a robot now. And I have to acknowledge it was through the generous support of the Community Foundation that we had the funds to purchase this robot. And we were using it now to provide tours of our galleries to hospitalized patients at SMH. So that was something that we were able to pivot. We had been so focused on providing support for the healthcare workers, but we realized we could also be reaching the patients. And this robot is a tool, especially in this time of isolation with limited, visitors in the hospital. Patients are really craving that one-to-one connection. So we have these conversations with them and let them be transported into the galleries with us. And just, pre-pandemic, we had sort of jokingly said with the hospital, oh yeah, one day we'll get robots and we'll do these kind of robotic tours. But now that the conversation has really advanced to, okay, what is the cutting edge technology that we can capitalize on? And it becomes a reality. And so it's been a really fun project for us as well.
I think we need to see pictures or video because a robot tour sounds pretty amazing.
That's incredible. I'm so excited to learn more about that, Laura, and to talk to you about it. And I just want to echo some of what I'm hearing from my colleagues. I was having trouble putting it in one word earlier, but everything that we've done kind of post-pandemic, and especially in the throes of it, is have to sort of return to that mission and like, what is our goal and how can we most effectively deliver it to make sure we're still serving the need, because we know the need is still there. And in many cases, the need is greater because of lack of access to these in-person programs. So we had to cancel our last school time performance and then found ourselves, what are we going to do when we normally do summer visits to help with the summer slide for reading in the grade level reading work that we do. And thankfully, with the Community Foundation of Sarasota's support, we were able to kind of quickly adapt, and they trusted us to learn, okay, how can we pivot as quickly as possible to make sure these services are still available in the summer and then ready to go in place for the school year, because we expected that this would not slow down by the time the school year started. So we were able to purchase the equipment that was needed to do Zoom lessons and build our Artworks Anywhere videos, which are on-demand videos that people can access from anywhere. And we've now housed them on our artworksanywhere.org site. We partnered with our not these summer learning academies, but our social service organizations like Girls Inc., Boys and Girls Club, who had found a way to really serve that need to safely provide care during the summer, to provide those arts activities that we would normally do in person so that they can continue to have those meaningful engagements, those things that really helped build that mental health, that sense of empowerment, that sense of creativity, and that sense of fun that was really in a time when they felt disconnected. I mean, those classrooms were separated from each other, and our Zoom visits had two classrooms right next to each other in the same building, interacting with each other, probably the only time during that day because they had to keep themselves so separate. And we were able to talk to their educators and learn what are the high needs areas, so we can be really mindful to craft the lessons that will carry into the school year and support that. We've shifted our school time performance program to entirely virtual, and I feel really fortunate to say this has shown a need and access within our community, because when we shifted to virtual, not only were we able to meet the goals that we normally do of that 30,000 mark, we're currently at serving over 38,000 students through our programming. I recognize it's not the same and it will never replace that in-person arts experience, but we found that we're serving students that wouldn't normally get it. And this has allowed us to take some risks because we've had to shift everything. So why can't we kind of fast tracked some programs that we had of really being mindful about building culturally relevant work. So I have teaching artists piloting that right now. We've identified not just the need for social emotional work, but really mindfulness and how the arts can help with mindfulness. So I have one of my fabulous teaching artists piloting that in a classroom right as we speak. And we've partnered with adults that are facing trauma, both existing trauma and our caring professionals, doctors and nurses, using the arts and mindfulness through work with the Resilient Retreat. So this has allowed us to expand our reach and expand our look of how the arts can help with not just student engagement and mental health, which is really what we've been doing, but allowed us to branch out and say, what can this look like in our wider community?
Kelli, thank you so much for sharing. Christopher's word to describe the past year, inspiring, is really resonating with me right now. I'm so inspired by the innovative work that all of you have done in a really short time frame to adapt to the pandemic and continue to provide essential educational programming to the community. I'm struck by this idea of access that Kelli brought up, and I heard Julie and Christopher also talking about it too, and thinking about giving access to their patrons, their student participants, to experiences beyond maybe those that they would have had in person, being able to tour universities virtually, Laura sending robots into hospitals to engage with patients that otherwise would not be able to come to the museum, and Kelli talking about really expanding the number of people who are served by the Van Wezel. Let's talk about maybe some of the lasting legacy of the pandemic in terms of things that you have been doing this past year that you think might carry forward even after we're able to safely gather in person again. Are there any innovations that you've taken on that you envision or anticipate will continue?
Yeah, I think access is a big point, and it goes across our whole community that we serve. So even from my board of directors down, so I feel like the Zoom meetings with the board of directors, we don't have as much absence due to, being out of town or anything like that. Also, people who are hard of hearing, the Zoom format is much better for them sometimes than in person even. And that's true for our patrons that want to watch our video performances. Now we've been able, also through some nice grant funding, and I want to thank the Community Foundation for all their support of WBTT each year is wonderful. But we have captionings for all the video products we're putting out. So we have a lot of shows on video, and that can be difficult going forward licensing wise, but we create a lot of our own programming here with our artistic director, Nate Jacobs, is incredibly creative and designs a lot of his own shows. So sometimes we will be able to share those still in the future, but it does, I think, provide a lot more access for certain populations that find the in-person difficult sometimes.
I'll add that we are definitely, virtual is something that is not going to go away, but I think something that we learn the best of, and we continue to offer that as part of our programs. So the videos that we've created, our Artworks Anywhere videos, we will continue that in future years and build that library as an everlasting resource for parents to use, for teachers to use. We have, goals to expand our audiences for where that reaches. And we've seen the need for some of these schools where the travel might be a problem, where virtual might continue, where a virtual teaching artist visit all of a sudden becomes more possible than me having a teaching artist travel all the way down, or the school traveling all the way to us, or even looking at a hybrid model where if it's a 2-lesson piece, lesson 1 is done virtually and lesson 2 is done within a classroom, because that also sets the student up for that level of excitement around meeting this teaching artist they've seen on their big active board. So I think it's going to let us expand our audiences, expand our reach, and I really hope make new partners and start to learn where some of the needs are in our community and how we can all work together to serve them. I feel like some of the barriers may be disappearing.
Christopher, how about at the ballet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna just, so we've, the company performances have been digitally recorded this year, which has actually allowed more access to the company, not just locally, but nationally and actually internationally. So while it's a challenging thing to do, first of all, at least it means the dancers have stayed employed and been able to perform, albeit to an open house. But I also want, also sort of, the other things we've done that I think will continue is, for example, our adult program. Some of our adult students who work from home can take an hour out of their day to pop onto Zoom, do a ballet class, and go back to work rather than traveling to the studio. And particularly, I feel we do a program with Neuro Challenge, which is joyful movement through Parkinson's for people with Parkinson's disease. And as you probably know, people with Parkinson's often have challenges in getting to our studio. So I think that we will probably continue doing it in a virtual format to support them, because again, they can do it from home with their caregivers, etc. So I do think that there is value to this, and we will. It's again, it's access and making people, the inclusivity of what we do be really open to everyone. So I think we will continue certainly those parts of our digital remit. So it's exciting, really, as I say, inspiring that we can keep reaching out to everyone in this way.
So Christopher, we did get a question in the Q&A kind of relating to what you've been talking about. I've heard a lot of groups here talking about access to your programs and how you really have been able to increase that through the pandemic. The question in the Q&A is what work you are all doing specifically that relates to people with disabilities or groups that provide disability services. So Christopher, you touched on that already, and I think Kelli, you have a follow-up.
I do, and this is actually some of the work that we have done pre-pandemic and are currently in that process of adapting of what this looks like and what it can look like moving forward. We have a long-standing relationship with the National VSA program, which is connected to very special arts. It actually no longer goes by that title; they just go by VSA. But we work with Oak Park School. We have a relationship with them and serve over 300 students each year at that charter, that magnet school for students with disabilities, and a number of the satellite programs throughout Sarasota and Manatee County to provide access programs where we bring drama workshops that mirror a social story to prepare students for visits to the Van Wezel, and then provide them with accessible seating locations and accommodations that we try and make as available as possible. And then after that show, the teaching artists go in a variety of art forms to do adapted versions of our workshops for students with disabilities to explore the themes and the content of the show. We also do a joint project with Oak Park and Lakeview, which is a neighboring school of students more typically developing, and we work with their second graders to do a joint arts project with Oak Park students. So that is more of a community building workshop to learn about each other and how we interact with individuals that may be different from us. And so that's a really wonderful program that we're looking what this looks like now, because the schools can't travel to each other. And we're in the process of building our films, our experiences as something that can be available on demand for students connected to our virtual, that become much more sensory based as opposed to lessons, and how we can explore and send different sensory experiences, like having different textures and art supplies sent to the school, and a video that helps to support that. That is sort of what we're working on now, and then having kind of an artist office hour or visit where they can meet the artist that created that work.
Yeah, I'll just add, we work with Easter Seals, and we had a in-person partnership that had gone back many, many years. And we've been able to provide some digital resources. It's not quite the same, but we also, in our school tours, often will get groups of kids who have developmental disabilities. So it's thinking about how we tweak the PowerPoint presentation we're using and make things just a little bit more, either autism friendly or just in general for people with developmental disabilities for students. And then on sort of the other end of the lifespan, our Ringling Reflections program that you had mentioned, Catherine, serves people with dementia And so this is sort of a late in life developmental disability that is a new challenge. And we have taken that virtual. And just like everyone has mentioned, removing the barriers of transportation and having to get your loved one up and out of bed and dressed. We sometimes have people just log on right in their pajamas, and that's okay, So yeah, the access has been great virtually. Obviously, some things are sort of lost when we're not together in person, but I think, like, to echo what you all have said, we are committed to keeping virtual around because it's a great way to reach people where they are.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing to bring healing to your patrons and to the community at this difficult time. I wonder if there's anything that your organization has learned about itself or its staff, and how much healing might be needed there during this traumatic time. Kelli was talking a bit earlier about the collective trauma that we're all living through. And Julie, I know that your team has been particularly hard hit by COVID. So could you talk a little bit about the experience of COVID from a staff perspective at your organization?
Yes, and especially from our artist perspective, I think, the staff, we've been rocking and rolling. I've actually been able to keep our entire staff employed thanks to wonderful, amazing grants through the County Cares program and some federal programs. So we are a small staff, 18 people, but our artists, this is their livelihood, is performing for people, and where there's video opportunities, they've been able to participate in those. But we've taken some time to develop some personal artistic projects we took on, I think, 3 artists this year to develop play works or professional recordings of their work, provide them housing during that time period. So that's been wonderful for people that couldn't be on the stage. They're still doing their creative artistic work that they love, and it's their passion. So that's been great. And then through the virtual format, and we've been able to employ several artists doing that. And right now we're rehearsing a show on stage, show pipeline that's going to be filmed. So it has equity artists for the first time. This is our first equity show since the pandemic started. That's the Actors Union, and they've been very limited with what they've approved, but we have very strict guidelines we're following, and hoping that all goes really well for the actors that are in it, and can't wait to share it with the community.
Christopher, I know you mentioned earlier the benefits of being able to keep artists employed through virtual delivery of your programming at this time. Other ways that your staff or organization has been impacted and in need of healing?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think what's been really great for the education team is, sorry, some noise behind me, is what keeps us going from a mental health standpoint, is the chance to continue inspiring the students. And we're fortunate in the Sarasota Ballet. There is Dance USA is this big national organization, and I'm part of the school directors group. And one of the things that we've been very much talking about is mental health for not only students but staff as well. And what I'm hoping to get started are some programs to help the staff feel supported, and avenues for them to be able to express how they're feeling with all this. Because I think a lot of us will agree we've sort of just kept going and had to pivot the way we do things in a way which has been somewhat challenging, somewhat easy, but often we don't often have time to stop and go, well, how are you doing? How's it going? And I think that one of the things about being part of Dance USA is that we share ideas between all these fantastic schools within the country. And I think that it's something that is going to be really supportive of for my staff, and equally to support what's happening in the world with all the racism that's going on. Something that's really important right now is culturally responsive teaching practices. And I'm really wanting to get behind that, to train even myself. I don't have enough knowledge, and work with our staff so that we can actually support our students who come from all sorts of different backgrounds, so that everybody feels that this is a safe place. And from a safe place, then the environment, they will feel supported and feel comfortable. And actually, they'll be more open to learning and experiencing and really developing for the future. So that's something that I'm excited about for the future.
Can I just say, I agree with what Christopher said about wanting to find ways to support the staff. And we have a staff of teaching artists. And actually, we've been fortunate enough to be able to grow that number. So we have more artists this year than we had in previous years that we are working with. But we've asked a lot of them. We've asked them to be very nimble as things are changing, and to learn new skills, to take their expertise and apply it in new ways. Many of the same challenges that we know our classroom educators have faced. So we really have tried to support that through having more time to, get together and listen and really hear what are some of the needs and what is working. And one of the big things is devote not just the time, but the supporting their own professional development. So we've brought in, if we're saying you're expected to do some of these activities and they want to do them, we're going to help them get the skills that makes them feel comfortable to do it, because otherwise we're adding stress to an already stressful time, and really talking to them about what is the development that you need, what sort of skills are you looking for. And thanks to our fabulous donors, have been able to give that to them and say, yes, we will pay for that training. I got to send all of my artists to the Kennedy Center virtual conference this year, something that I've never been able to do before. And I'm just so thankful that we are able to support and listen in that way.
Laura.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Christopher mentioned as well about this sort of new and in many ways not new racial reckoning that's happening, because I think if we're talking about healing and coming together as a staff, that has to be a part of the conversation. And I'm really proud at the Ringling that we have sort of finally explicitly begun our anti-racism efforts. And we're getting all staff on board with that, as well as all of our volunteers virtually at this point. Because I think, we've been talking so much about the pandemic and its influence on mental health, but parallel to that is the racial injustice that's come to the fore over the past year. And we have to grapple with that as cultural institutions and figure out how we pivot moving forward, and start making all of our decisions through an equity lens. How do we redefine ourselves and our purpose and who our community is? And so we've been having those conversations at the Ringling, and I think it's been really productive and gotten people feeling optimistic about where we go from here. And I think that has been this one benefit of the pandemic is there's no more status quo to sort of fall back on. Everything's been shaken up and we have to reconsider everything. And so we've taken that opportunity to do that with staff at all levels. And like I mentioned, and our volunteers as well.
Well, on behalf of the community, many thanks to you and your staff for all that you have been doing and are continuing to do to bring healing to our community. I know we're getting ready to pivot into a Q&A portion of this conversation. So maybe as a way of doing that and kind of thinking about the future as more and more people are getting vaccinated and hopefully it will be safe to gather again in person soon. Let's talk a little bit about, what we've learned and how we envision the arts being part of the community going forward. Laura, I want to come back here to your word essential that you used at the beginning of this conversation, a recognition of the essential role that the arts can play in bringing healing to our community, which you spoke about, so eloquently just now, and in thinking about helping us combat racism in our society. Tell me a little bit about what you all are looking forward to as we welcome the community back to our arts organizations, and how you see this relationship continuing in the future.
Yeah, so I think, having just sort of laid out this massive, ambitious plan to, work on anti-racism, I think there's a lot cultural institutions can do on a much smaller scale to just sort of bring people together, remind us of our shared humanity and shared connections. In the museum, it's this sort of place where you can gather now with a purpose. I think during the pandemic, a lot of us would maybe go on neighborhood walks aimlessly because there was nowhere else to go. But now in the museum, you can walk and you can be inspired. And I think there's something so comforting about being in a museum and seeing art that is spanning cultures and centuries tragedies. It reminds us that humanity endures, that there have been ups and downs, there have been pandemics in the past, there have been great tragedies, but from that has also come things of great beauty and joy. And I think, unlike my colleagues who are all, in the sort of the performance world, I think in performance, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's, I think, a beauty in having this collective arts experience with a whole group of people. But conversely, in the museum, it's more like you can sort of choose your own adventure, so you can find what you need in that moment. So if you've experienced a lot of tragedy and loss, you can find that mirrored in objects on the wall. Or if you need a distraction, you need something uplifting, you can seek that out. Or maybe you're just feeling dull and uninspired by a year of lockdown, and you can find something that's, to spark curiosity and wonder. So I think the role of the arts moving forward can be minute. It can be just having this moment of, oh, I want to learn more. I want to have some personal reflection and share with my family. Or it can be something on a much larger scale. So I'm excited and optimistic about the role that we all can play.
I would agree, and I think, Laura, you were spot on with what some of the beauty is with the live performing arts. I'm like, I think all of us, and I think the people listening to this panel, we haven't been able, Sarasota built itself as an arts community. It is truly something that I know we value as a community, and we've been denied access to that for well over a year. So what I'm looking for is, that moment that we get to step back into a theater, sit down together, have the lights come down, and what that means as a community, that to kind of re-experience that for the first time and what that spark is like. And in my role as education director, it's something it's my favorite part of my job, because I see that in the young people that come to the show, because we get to be a lot of their first experiences in theater. So as you kind of re-enter into that theater world, I hope you'll see what that wonder, what that magic is. We'll all get to experience it again for the first time, and that this is the sort of goal for those young people in our community, especially those that are traditionally denied access or don't have access, that we can work together to make sure no one has to experience that lack of arts again, at least live arts.
Yeah, I have a new word, if we can go back to the one word. So I would say resilience. I think WVTT has been resilient over its 20 years of bumpy progress, but also my staff, all the staff at WVTT and the artists, maybe unpredictable for me, but they've been very resilient through all this, and still see their mission clearly of bringing wonderful arts to the community, and healing and educating and all that stuff that all of you do. You're all resilient. So.
And Julie, our arts organizations have been doing that together, right? Because you've been working with the Safe Arts side of things that we're all
Yes,
doing together,
yeah,
right?
that's right. I wanted to mention that. So, and the ballet also, all of us, the arts organizations here locally in Sarasota have been involved in this at Safe Arts Sarasota program, where we are bringing back live programming, all of us, some at different times in the year, but we've had something in the fall and something in the spring, but outdoors and with masks and temperature checks and all that. So we've all come up with safer protocols to keep our audiences engaged, the smaller audiences, but at least they do have an opportunity. And last time when we closed our outdoor show, March 14th, I think I did the stage speech at the beginning, and I said, who's had a vaccine? And like every hand in the parking lot went up. So people are eager to come back once they're vaccinated, which is a nice feeling.
And then for me, I think one of the best things about Sarasota, I think it's the best city in Florida to live in because of the arts community. And what I'm most excited about is I believe that this population that supports all of us and all the arts community is just absolutely, they just can't wait to come back to support us. So I think we're going to get an increased interest in all of our arts organizations, because people are starving for it, basically. And I just can't wait. It's sort of what Kelli said, that I love the fact we can perform outside right now. That's fantastic. We can get something. But there's something about being in the theater when the lights go down, whether it's your first time or your 500th time, there's that just excitement. And I have a feeling that the first time we do that, wherever it may be, the first time the lights go down, I feel like there's going to be spontaneous applause or something. You know, it's just going to be such a special moment. I'm getting chills thinking about it.
It is.
And, you know, and I think that how great that we have all these options in Sarasota that can support every art form that's going. It's just amazing. So we're very blessed.
I think we as a community have really recognized what it does for our own mental health. So that kind of strikes this conversation of how can this continue? Because we all realize now what the arts provide that maybe we couldn't name before.
Thank you so much, Kelli, Christopher, Julie, and Laura, for helping make that visible to all of us who are attending today. This was a great conversation. Thank you. Angelica, are you going to manage the Q&A portion?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So to launch us into the Q&A portion of this session, I know that earlier we were hitting the theme of racial justice and talking about how that's risen to the forefront here locally across the nation over this past year. And it's really in the front of a lot of people's minds right now. So we were wondering if you had some suggestions on steps that people on this call currently could take to support this work here locally. And Julie, I was hoping to maybe start with you with that conversation.
Well, yes. So within the areas of leadership and employees and actors, people on the stages, I think access, again, we're getting back to access to leadership roles, equity in hiring, all those things are very important. It's not so much, diversity is important, but sometimes diversity is maybe a white culture looking to diversify within that, but for equity and access is more, I think, what persons of color and BIPOC people are looking for. And leadership. So, and sometimes I say it's about relationship and relevancy too. Those are some concepts I like to think about with this. How are we in relationship with the BIPOC patrons in our community? How are we providing access to BIPOC patrons that maybe don't think of themselves as theater goers and haven't had that experience? And then relevancy, what stories are we telling that they want to come see? You know, so those are all the kind of concepts I think about that everybody can.
We've been kind of in our own reflection of how we can, how as the Van Wezel, we can make sure we're more culturally responsive to the work that we're doing, but also I think this is a great question because I do believe that it is something that the community needs to embrace and have these conversations together. One of the things that we've done, and I think it goes to what is this next step and how can we all do it, is we've had a relationship with one of the Kennedy Center citizen artists, Olmeka, who's a bilingual hip hop artist, and he's done some culturally responsive teaching, professional development for teaching artists in the community. And we opened this up to anyone, not just Van Wezel artists, and to educators of any type. We had preschool teachers and after school professionals, and then something specifically for music teachers. But our next step for this is to host a community dialogue and conversation about what does it mean about cultural relevancy, and have him do a presentation for the community to initiate that sort of conversation and what could those next steps. So first, what does it look like? What are our goals? Because then I think we need to have the conversation of what are we going to do, because this is not going to fix itself. And we need to make sure that saying just because we opened a door or think we opened a door that automatically everyone's going to be able to walk through it or feel comfortable walking through it or feel like they see themselves on the other side of the door. I think that's really important. And I think who are we engaging when we're having these conversations? You know, I'm so honored to be on this panel, and I'm very proud of the work that we do, but I also recognize that there is somewhat of a lack of diversity on this panel itself. So really want to call out who are the voices that we're not hearing, and how can we make sure that there is that they are given their opportunity to speak, or how can I, as a leader within the community, take that moment to step back and let others be able to share that experience.
Absolutely. I think that's so important, Kelly. And I think you hit all the points right on the head of, starting this conversation with the community, getting so many different populations involved in this, and really giving everyone that voice to have this conversation respectfully and be able to move forward.
And I hope, Angelica, we hope to have that date available soon for when that community conversation would be. We'd love to share that with you and hope that your donors, we would welcome anyone that may love to come and be a part of that conversation. It will be available virtual.
That would be amazing. Yes, if you will share that with us, we would be happy to help spread the word of that when it's ready. Absolutely. Another question, and this one's going to be directed specifically to Laura, but kind of open up to everyone since I know we're all involved in different art forms here, is has a certain type of art been more appealing in these conversations that are ongoing during the pandemic? Are people looking for art that reflects kind of these difficult situations that we're going through now, or are they looking for more escapist or fantastical art? What are you finding is relating to your populations that you're serving now?
That's such a great question, Angelica. Thank you. I think for everyone, all of our audiences at the beginning, ourselves included, we wanted to talk about the pandemic. We wanted to process. We have this amazing 15th century altarpiece that was actually made during an outbreak of the plague in Italy, and people would like pray to it for salvation and to be saved from this terrible disease. So things like that felt incredibly relevant, and just other works that were kind of processing difficult situations. And then I think we noticed just this switch that went off, and we got tired of talking about it. And all of a sudden we wanted escapism, and we wanted to be engaging in other ways and not be talking about pandemic anymore. So I think, that sort of happened not only like in the programs we were offering, but what people were posting about on social media. All of a sudden, all of our pandemic related content was not getting a lot of interest. So I think, in particular, when we're working with, for example, the SMH patients, they are very much looking for a positive painting or an experience, something that is that escapism. We have paintings of kindness, paintings that represent peace or sort of bucolic landscapes. And those I think are really hitting home right now. But I think it's kind of a mix. I think people are just so tired of talking about it that we're sort of hoping to feel back to normal. So there is sort of a range there. We have the darker paintings. We have a lot of really like macabre things on our walls as well. And those are just as well received because I think people just want to go back to normal and have that range of emotional experience.
Are any of our other organizations seeing similar trends?
I'm processing a lot of what Laura said about that switch. And I'm like, I didn't realize it, but you were exactly right. There was this moment where we felt like we were all in it together and everything was about surviving. I think our resiliency is set in, like we're ready to know what, not everything is just in response to a pandemic, but now we're like, what do we need? Not because it's a pandemic, but because we need it.
Yeah, I get the feeling that our patrons are just done with it. They've been kind of holding their breath for a year and want to come back. But I think we all know as a society that it won't be instant and some things we'll carry forward. So let's try and carry forward the positive things we've learned.
Absolutely. So I can see here that we are almost out of time. We have 1 more minute left in our panel today. So I wanted to close us out by first off thanking our panelists. Thank you all for bringing your insight and your input and sharing your programming with us and with our donors and our board and our community. We appreciate all the work that you're doing, all the time that you're putting into this work. And I can't thank you enough for sharing that and being so open and willing to share and participating here today. So thank you so much. I also want to thank our donors who are on this call today. Thank you for making the work that we do in this area possible. Thank you for, enabling us to give these grants to these organizations and help them further their work. So thank you so much for everything that you do for us. We appreciate you. We appreciate our arts organizations here locally. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.